Welcome back, folks. Um, Sad to say, it's the last section, the last chapter, chapter 14. Feels like we've been talking about the gender of violence the entire semester, so much of this stuff is going to feel as if we've already covered it. But it's nice to have it all packaged in one place. Um, and so hopefully you've enjoyed the lectures over the course of the semester, um, both mine and the lectures on feminism. So when we talk about the gender of violence, we really need to be honest about what we're talking about. We are talking about males being responsible for the vast majority of all of the violence in our society. As a nation, we are preoccupied with violence. We talk a lot about teen violence, violence in the inner city, urban gangs. We, of course, expressed shock when any of these events happen. School shootings, gang activity resulting in fatalities or rapes in society. And we feign, this disgust with what's going on. Of course, if you're consuming any media these days, we see reports of bombings and hate violence. We see militias armed, but we don't construct it as being male dominated. If females were doing all of this stuff, males would certainly zero in on what is going on with females that's resulting, what is going on with women that is resulting in all this violence. But because males are the dominant in society, male behavior goes unexamined, much like white behavior goes unexamined in racial conversations, and wealthy people's behavior goes unexamined in conversations about class. The same thing's happening with men here. But what we really have to realize is that almost all shooters are male. It's not biological. This is not something that's testosterone driven. It's something that's being reproduced in reference to gender inequality throughout the institutions of our society. And then the behavior itself is a manifestation of the structural gender inequality that's built into the system. And we also know it's not universal. You can find cultures that do not share, and most cultures do not exhibit the violent behavior that we see in the United States. Once again, folks, we're number one. Okay, USA. What we know about gender violence is that you tend to have a higher level of gender inequality in societies where masculinity and femininity are seen as polar opposites. That's certainly what we have in the United States. At least we've had in the United States for most of our history. Male, female, masculine, feminine are represented by the polar extremes. Small, petite females, or females that are becoming smaller and smaller and smaller, and more petite, needing the protection of larger and larger males. Those types of societies are ultimately going to produce gender inequality, which in turn is going to produce most likely high levels of violence. In the United States, just to put it all in perspective, what we're talking about in reference to men, homicides rates in the United States are 5 to 20 times higher than other industrialized democracies. 9 out of 10 male murder victims are killed by men, and 9 out of 10 female murder victims are killed by men. So 18 of 20 deaths are male perpetrated. 9 out of 10 DUIs, men. 84% of drunk driving with fatal car accidents, men. 86% of arson crimes, men. And much of this is perpetrated against women. And especially when we're talking about murder and rape against women by men, this is not about sex. This is about power. And males trying to dominate females, put them back in their place. And as males lose their power, perceived power in a relationship or in society, they tend to lash out against females and justify it as, it's her fault. She wanted it. She needed to be put back in her place anyway. We also need to talk about women's criminality. Women tend to commit different crimes than men. There's an argument that crime rates for women have increased. That is true in the aggregate, but overall, women's criminality has decreased since the 18th century. So we've seen increases in the last few decades, but those increases are small. But when the numbers of violent crimes are small in the first place, a small rise looks like a significant increase in criminality. But when compared to what's going on with males in reference to criminality, what females are bringing to the table pales in comparison. And what we do see is we see a reduction with females in reference to violent crimes, but petty crimes like shoplifting, credit card fraud, bad checks, those things tend to be showing some tendencies to rise. For women, murder is the most prevalent form of violent crime. 2/3 kill relatives, intimate partners, or someone they know. And we also know that societies with high rates of male crime also have high rates of female crime. But once again, even though 2/3, or even though the most prevalent form of violent crime is murder, that's still decreasing. And there's some question about why that is. And many think that what we see today is there's more shelters for abused women. Women have a higher chance of having criminal charges brought against their spouses for sexual abuse, physical abuse, and or rape. We have to remember that half of the states still did not recognize rape by an intimate partner, especially if the husband was raping the wife. She really didn't have much of an argument for a case of rape. Apparently, when you say you do, as the book says, that means you do whenever he wants. So there's some speculation about why the numbers are decreasing, but it still doesn't change the fact that that overall we're seeing more numbers of females committing crimes, but the fact that the types of crimes are different than what males are doing. We should probably talk about violence as an institution, an institutional problem. Almost all of our social institutions deal with violence in one way, shape, or form. Edward Teller, when he created the nuclear explosion due to nuclear fusion, and realized that this explosion was greatly larger than the bombs using nuclear fission we used in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. His first response was, "It's a boy." So its ability to wreak violence and havoc on whatever it came into contact with certainly inspired its creator to say it's a boy. Militarism, masculinity, and violence, they have went together since I can remember, and further back than that. The stories we tell ourselves about why we should go to war, and hero worship for those that accomplish great feats in war, which generally means that you killed a lot of people, and hopefully saved people on your side. But it still doesn't take the fact away that you killed a lot of people on the other side as well. And of course, this is not an example of individual psychological insecurities. This is the institutions themselves. Our peer groups gauge us, judge us based on our adherence to masculine forms for males and feminine forms for females. The media itself is fraught with violence. It seems like everything you watch in one way, shape, or form is violent, whether it's sports or it's the news or it's nightly television or whatever we're consuming. It seems like we're consuming a lot of violence, which ultimately normalizes that. We see this, of course, in video games, and it's really playing out in our institutions themselves, and it's making it hard to resist what it means to be males and what it means to be females. And those two choices really do define whether you're going to, or it makes it much more likely for you to be violent if you're accepting the traditional male norms than if you're doing something other, whether that's traditional female norms or choosing other lifestyles, lesbian, bisexual, queer, transsexual, transgender. Those categories tend to have violence inflicted upon them by those accepting the traditional male gender norms.